Good evening, and welcome to the 2 Minute Warning. This is our third evening, and we're glad to have you. We have another exciting evening planned for you. But before we begin, I want to introduce my co-host and my partner in crime in this, Mr. Bobby Henry.
Thank you so
How you
very
doing,
much,
Bobby?
Corey. Hey man, it's all good. I'm glad to be here. The past couple of nights have been most enlightening and extremely educational, and I certainly appreciate that. On behalf of the West Side Gazette, the NNPA, the Black Press of America, Perry, we are elated to be a part of this conversation, this entire educational process, from the ballot to the box and beyond. So thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. It could not have been done without you and the long legacy of the West Side Gazette, starting with your father, Mr. Levi Henry. And we just want to say hello to Mr. Henry, who's watching. Right. And but I'm really excited about tonight. We have an exciting guest. Monday night, we started out with Jennifer Cohen, who took us down into the deep, dark side of voting and talked about the players and the landscape that we're dealing with. And then last night, we had a good friend, Benny Smith, election commissioner in Shelby County, Tennessee, who just shocked, I might as well say, just shocked the draws off of people.
To say the least, yeah, absolutely.
With his fraction magic and giving us a further insight of what happens at the ballot box and when the polls close. And so I'm very happy to have had Benny on, and I'm sure he says that he has a previous engagement, but he may join us tonight. But tonight we have a very exciting guest, Miss Emily Levy, or should I say Emily Levy? Let me get that straight.
Emily Levy. Me, so yeah.
Emily has been working in election security for over 50 years. In 2004, she coordinated the precinct level statistical forensic investigation into the presidential election in Ohio. And that was during the George Bush, John Kerry election. And for those of us who remembered what was going on in 2004, Ohio was a hotbed. And so Emily was intimately involved in making sure and investigating that election. Emily has also been an advocate for election security, and her work has traveled the country from the East Coast to the West Coast and from North and South. She's a native of California, but she has deep roots in history in Ohio, Arizona, New York, Wisconsin, Nevada, New Mexico, Virginia, and Florida, because those are the places where she has taken her work and others have called for her expertise in our pursuit of having a transparent election. In January 2020, Emily founded scrutineers.org. This is a fast-growing online community for people who want to help make our elections fair and secure and accessible. And Emily is known throughout the industry, and she has created the essential platform that's needed to bring us together around this cause. And so without further delay, I want to introduce Emily Levy.
Mhm.
Hi, Emily. Your microphone is muted.
Good point. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Perry and Bobby. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I really appreciate that introduction. It was so enthusiastic. I'm almost embarrassed. And there's one thing that I'd like to say, which is I have been an activist for over 50 years, but not an election security advocate for that long. Like 50 years ago, I was 10 years old, and my activism then was a petition drive for girls to be allowed to wear pants to school. So that's where I started.
Mhm.
And have done many things since then, but worked in this field since just after the 2004 election.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. You know, keeping people dressed.
I guess I should specify that girls had to wear dresses. It's not that we were supposed to be
Mhm.
naked from the waist down. Yeah.
No,
But
no.
but that's great testimony, because I think that may be one of the things that our younger generation simply does not have a chance to really get involved in activism at that level. Sometimes, usually, it's related to some big social incident, but in your case, I mean, this was about a policy change,
Yeah,
and
and I think
that's very different.
where a lot of us start is the things that affect us personally the most closely, right? So,
Mhm.
for me, that at that time, that was one of those things.
Mhm.
And 10 years old. Uh, but looking at that, I've been meaning to ask everyone, and so I will ask you: what was your first election, and what do you remember about that, and how did you get involved?
Well, I have a feeling this isn't really what you're asking. I remember going with my mom to vote when I was a kid and going and voting on the lever voting machines, which are quite an ingenious invention that I wish we were still using, because it's actually very hard to steal an election that's conducted on those machines, but they're not in use anymore. Um, and so that's my first memory of voting, is doing that. And I think probably I was, a toddler or young child at that time. But I used to, with my mother, walk precincts for candidates she supported. I grew up doing that. So I've been politically involved all my life. She was really active in the struggle for school integration in San Francisco when I was growing up. And so that idea of what you can fight City Hall is really what I was raised with. And I feel so thankful to her for
Mhm.
teaching me that. And and then in terms of this election work, I volunteered with what was then called the Election Protection Coalition, which is now the 866 Our Vote Election Protection Hotline. In the 2004 election, I traveled to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and helped in their statewide office in the few days leading up to the election. And then on election day, my job was, when people called into that hotline, and it was the first year of the hotline, I was taking the calls and entering the complaints into the system about what was happening when people were trying to vote. And just, hearing story after story of people who were registered and should have been allowed to vote and were turned away for different reasons, and machines breaking down, and all the kinds of things that we've heard about for years. And I felt in my gut that the election results in the presidential election that year were not right. My gut said this election was stolen. I don't even remember exactly why it was that I thought that, but I did, and I wanted to get involved, and I had no idea what I could do. And I ended up getting a call from a friend who had heard a radio interview of a guy named Richard Hayes Phillips, who lived in a tiny town in upstate New York, who was doing an investigation into what happened in the Ohio election that year. And that was the state that put Bush over the top. If Kerry had won Ohio, he would have been elected, and if Bush won, he was going to get a second term. I won't say reelected because he wasn't elected the first time either. And Ohio was the last state for its results to come in. So this man, Richard Hayes Phillips, who's a statistician, was doing a precinct level statistical analysis of what happened in Ohio. And he did an interview on our local alternative radio station, Pacifica radio station. And my friend heard it and she called me up and she said, maybe this guy needs some help. And I thought, well, he's some big muckety muck. He gave his email address on the air, but he's not going to, who am I to help him, But I said, why not? I'll give it a try. And I emailed him and he called me about 20 minutes later and said, yes, I need help. And so I didn't really know that much about elections at that time, but I knew how to run a project. I'd done all kinds of projects and I was and am a mom, so I knew how to do 15 things at once, like moms do. And so I put those skills to use, and that's really where I got my education about our election systems, and a lot of what's wrong with them was kind of on the volunteer job, doing that work for him, coordinating his investigation. And learning all kinds. He would call me up in the middle of the night and say, you're not going to believe what I just found, because he just couldn't sleep. He was so involved in, finding all kinds of problems that, it was almost like something different that was crooked happened in each place in the state. And he found the most interesting ways to discover the differences, like, places where all the other races, the Democrat won, but the Republican won. And when they looked at kind of the combinations of the ways people voted, it just didn't make any sense. And that kind of thing would draw his eye, and then he would look further into what happened and really get down into the statistics for each precinct and look at what happened there. So that's how I got started. That was a long answer.
No, it's a good answer. Okay.
No, it's great. So many questions in that. Because you raised a great point, and that is, a lot of people, when we talk about the subject of getting involved in elections and election protection, the first thing they say is, I really don't have any skills. And that's a common, I think that's a common thing for everyone that gets involved in this.
I think so too. Mm-hmm. And it's really part of why I wanted to start Scrutineers, was to help, because there wasn't a way for people to figure out how to use the skills that they have and put them to use in the service of fair elections, beyond volunteering for a candidate or helping people register to vote, which are also really important things to do. And also for people who want to know more about how our election systems work and don't work. There wasn't really a good way for them to learn. And so I wanted to make a place where people who say, I don't like all this stuff I'm hearing about election problems with election security. I want to know more. I wanted a place that people could go without a lot of starting out with any expertise, and be able to learn about it and figure out how they could take action.
Emily, the name Scrutineers, where did that come from? How did that come about?
It's a funny story, actually a short story though. I was watching an Australian TV show about the post-World War II era, a TV drama, and two of the characters in the show end up running against each other in an election. And of course, for the dramatic effect, the election's really close, and it comes down to election night, and everybody's in the town square waiting for the results, and they don't know who won, and they don't know who won. And somebody says, well, who's the winner of this election? And the response was, we won't know until the scrutineer arrives. And I went, scrutineer? What a word. What's that? So I looked it up online, like we do now. We have internet access, and I found out that it was actually a word, and that it means election monitor or investigator. And in Australia and also Britain and several African countries, that's what people are called who do election monitoring and investigations. I've since found out Canada is another place where that word is used, but just not used wasn't used here in the United States. So the next day I bought the URL scrutineers.org. And at the time, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But once I figured out that I wanted to start this online kind of training and activism community, I knew right away that that was what it was going to be called. And since then, I have to say, I wasn't sure if people would remember the name, but usually they do. And what I've found is that it stands out to people because there are so many of these election protection organizations that have names that sound really similar. And it's kind of hard, even for me, to tell them apart sometimes and to remember which one has which name. So I enjoy having a name that's really different.
Yeah, that's definitely something to remember that stays with you. Yeah. Also, too, now, I know when we begin to talk about this election process, the thought that something that is so ingrained in our system that there are ways for folks to actually sway or steal an election. What's one of the most memorable things that you can remember in your working in this field?
So one was in that Ohio election in 2004, there was a recount, and the recount was actually not called for by the Democrats or Republicans, but the Green Party and the Libertarian Party came together to demand, and I believe also pay for, I can't remember if they had to pay for a recount in Ohio. And one of the things that the recount volunteers discovered was that there was a county where they were using the kind of ballots where there are ovals that you need to fill in for the candidates. And they found little oval stickers in the election office that election office workers were putting on the ballots to cover up votes and marking them with other candidates.
Stickers.
That was pretty memorable.
Stickers. Uh-huh.
And I don't remember if it was the same county or another county that they actually had a sign on the wall that had the numbers that they were going for, like that they, maybe I shouldn't say this because I don't remember the details of it, but it was like it was how they had to make the votes come out right, like what the right answers would be. So they made sure to match them with the monkey business they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's one thing. And I just today, actually, I didn't have to remember this very long because it only happened today. I was watching an online court hearing for a really important lawsuit in Georgia that's being brought by the Coalition for Good Governance, which is a group there that has very diligently fought against the electronic voting systems there, both the old ones that used to be used and now the as bad or even worse ones that they've been replaced with this year. And they're in court fighting to have those machines outlawed before the general election. And because of COVID, the actual court hearing is taking place on Zoom, and people can watch it. It continues tomorrow at 10 o'clock Eastern time in the morning. And it's public, and you can't talk, but you can go there and watch it. Today, they were showing that some of the way that the scanners that scan paper ballots. And when people think, oh, I don't vote on a computer, I vote on a paper ballot. Well, that paper ballot is still counted by a computer that could be manipulated to produce any result that whoever's manipulating it wants the election to have. So the scanners were actually not counting the votes properly in Georgia. And there was a member of Scrutineers who's also a member of Coalition for Good Governance who was testifying this afternoon about how she actually was part of the team that does adjudication, where they look at the ballots that the machines can't count and figure out what the votes are on there. She was doing that for the county where she lives. And she showed in her exhibit that they had a ballot that they tried feeding into the scanner 4 different ways, like I think it was the top edge first, the top edge last, face up, face down. I think those were the 4 different ways. I don't think it was being turned this way, sideways. And every way that they fed it in, the same ballot, the same piece of paper, it was getting a different count for what the votes were on that ballot. And they tried feeding it in each of the 4 ways 5 times, and they didn't get one of those where all 5 were the same, where it counted the votes the same way. So how are you going to trust a machine to count your votes if you can see, in an experiment, that feeding the same piece of paper in one time after another, and it's counting the votes on that paper differently? I find that I even find that shocking, and I've been shocked. I thought all my shock was used up by now.
Okay. Now, in terms of scrutineers, what is? I know it's. Can you explain it? We
Sure.
talked about it before coming together. Can you explain it?
Yeah, I'll explain it, and then maybe we could show what the homepage looks like, and we have a little 3-minute video that we just had done, and we could show that, and that'll explain it a slightly different way. So, so you could leave that there, and I'll talk for a moment. So Scrutineers is different from other election protection websites because if you go there, all you'll see is one page that's kind of tells about what it is, but you can't look up where you go to vote on there. You can't, it's not like a fully fledged website that you see. It's a membership site that you need to join in order to see the rest of what's there. And once you join, you see that there's a ton on the inside. So it's a place for people to connect who are doing election protection work or want to. So we have discussion boards where people can post questions and others chime in and answer, or post links to things, post articles, and people discuss them, things like that. We also have training events that we post in there. And like, for example, this Saturday, we have an orientation for new members, and it'll take place on Zoom. And then the events, the recordings of them are all in there afterwards. So sometimes those events are community gatherings of different sorts, and sometimes they're trainings on specific things people can do to help protect the elections. And then we also have small groups in there that we call circles, which are kind of similar to a Facebook group where people can connect with each other around a particular topic, or who live in the same state to figure out how they want to work together to protect the elections. So the point of it is really for people to be able to do 3 things: connect with each other, and learn, and act. So that's what it's all about. And it's we just started in January. We've got over 650 members, and our intention is to grow to 10,000 by November. So we're going to have to do that pretty fast for it to happen. I do want to mention there is a membership fee, which is $1.99 one-time fee. And the reason that we do that is to keep bots out of the site, and also to make it less likely that people will join just to disrupt things, which could happen. So we hope that that's not a barrier for anybody to join. And like I said, it's a one-time fee of $1.99. So do you want to show a little bit, scroll down a little bit, and maybe show the video? I think it might be in the middle. I think you might need to, yeah, it's going to need to start again. Maybe refresh the page would be the fastest way to do that, because you were looking at it before when we were trying to see if this would work. There we go. I don't hear it. Can the audience hear it? I don't hear it.
No. It's technology.
Okay, I'm going to join the stream. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm going to join the stream to see
Hi, Ari.
if the audio will pick up. Hi, Miss Emily. All right, let's refresh it one more time. Thank everybody for their patience. And you guys let me know if you can hear it on your side.
Now we can.
Elections in the U.S. are a mess. Running fair and accurate elections for hundreds of millions of people would be a hard enough job if everyone was working together to get it right. But that's not where we are today. Right now, there are people and organizations trying to stop you from voting and stop your vote from being counted accurately. That's un-American, and we can't let them get their way. When they deregister voters, we need to re-register them. When they pass laws that you have to have a photo ID to vote, we have to work to change those laws and help people get the ID they need in the meantime. When they decrease the number of polling places, we need to expose their racist and power-hoarding tactics, get more polling places open, and get the option to vote by mail or drop off our paper ballots. When they try to force us to vote on computers that can be programmed to produce false results, we fight back. We push for hand-marked paper ballots. We organize communities to keep an eye on the election so they can be as safe and secure as possible. We're scrutineers. We fight to protect the voters, and we fight to protect the votes. The news of the last few years has raised people's awareness of foreign interference in our elections. The phrase, election security, has become familiar, but not enough people know that the problems go far beyond foreign interference. The very systems we use to count our votes are vulnerable to manipulation by hackers, election staffers, and even the corrupt and partisan voting system vendors themselves. It's easy to think there's nothing we can do about it, but the truth is there's lots. In fact, it's going to take a fairness force of thousands of us to protect the election this fall. Many of us will be able to do that work from home, online. Scrutineers is training people to be part of that fairness force. Those who came before us fought for the right to vote. Join us to protect that right. Every day you're impacted by the decisions of the government. Join us to help make sure we're actually choosing our leaders. If you care about the future of democracy, join us. Join us at scrutineers.org.
Wow.
Thanks for playing that.
Yeah, that's
Great.
cool. Emily, I got a question for you. Yeah, you
Okay.
know, I'm sitting here. I was watching that, and it took me back to a moment in history where Black folk had to go through all kinds of things to even get an opportunity to stand in line to vote. You know, and I had my first experience of going to behind the scene voting with the voting tapes. You know, so how can people who have been left out or not knowledgeable enough to get involved with this? How can you make it so we could easy for us to get involved with?
It's a great question. Can I ask you what you mean about the voting tapes?
Yeah, because of Perry, he made me go out after the elections to go take my camera and film the tapes that were placed on the door.
The poll tapes, yeah,
poll
great.
tape. Mm-hmm.
And I hope that last night when Benny Smith, who's actually also on our advisory committee, when he was talking, did his presentation last night, I don't remember if he mentioned this, but when he talks about fraction magic and how people's votes can be counted as a fraction, more or less than one whole vote, that one of the few things that can be done to catch that is exactly what you participated in.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you got to talk to him about what can we do about that. Did you? And so taking pictures of those poll tapes, which look like cash register receipts, and in most states they have to be hung outside the door or showing through the window of every polling place at the end of election night. So what they have on them is the totals for each voting machine for every candidate and every race on the ballot. So that taking pictures of those is a way of proving what the counts were at the end of election night. And then comparing those when you compare those later to the totals that appear on the websites of the counties, and they'll usually post the totals by precinct. So you can look and see, do they add up? And he found, as he talked about last night, that he discovered a place where, in a precinct that was primarily African American, 40% of the votes disappeared between the time that the poll tape was printed and the time the county announced the totals. This was in Shelby County, Tennessee, where he lives. So that's a really, really important election protection activity, because it can catch the machines counting wrong. It doesn't say whether they counted wrong because of an accidental error or intentional manipulation. It doesn't tell you that. But I don't, like, if we can find out what the real totals are and who actually won the election, that's more important to me than knowing whether it was an accident or not that the votes weren't counted properly.
Now, Emily, here's are poll tape are posting of poll tapes a requirement in every state, or should I say, is it law in every state?
It's not in every state. And in fact, it's a little bit tricky to find out whether it is in your state or not. In any given state. It's because they're not always called the same thing. Like, poll tapes is what we tend to call them, and I think it's what they're called in most places, but I'm not sure that's what they're called everywhere. So it takes a little bit of research to find out. I think probably the easiest way is if you know somebody who's been a poll worker in the past, especially if they've been a supervisor, a captain, or whatever the leader of the poll workers at each precinct is called, to ask them if they were required to post them, or to call your board of elections or your elections department, depending, those have different names in different states, and ask, are these posted? Because it isn't required everywhere.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions, because I know here in Florida, here in Broward, we noticed that several precincts were missing their poll tapes, and so that becomes just another part of the process of having to fight so that you can get the data. But that was one of the things that we have found out here in Broward, is just that not every precinct posts their poll tapes,
even when it's required.
Yeah.
And we found that in California here. And what I want to say about that is, it shouldn't happen. It's very unfortunate that, we're in places where that is the law or regulation, it's there for an important reason, and it should really happen. And one of the things that I think I'd like to say to people watching is, if you are going to be a poll worker this year or in future elections, or if you could consider becoming a poll worker, that could put you into the position of being there at the end of the night and making sure those poll tapes get posted. And it's actually one of the things that we're working on in Scrutineers, is providing some additional training to poll workers before the election, beyond the training that they'll get from the county that they're working for. So that they know about things like this, what they can do to help protect the election while they're working as poll workers.
And Emily, the Scrutineers, I know we talked about what you do. Is there an age requirement or of joining, or?
There's not, and in fact, it's something that I really like to point out to people, is there are a lot of people who really care about what's going on in this country and don't have the right to vote, either because they're not old enough, or because they live in a state where they're prohibited from voting because of criminal convictions, or because they're not citizens, but they still really care and they want to get involved. And working on election protection is a way that they can have an impact on the election even without having the legal right to vote. And we absolutely welcome people in any of those situations to join Scrutineers and work with us.
Yeah, in fact, that's a great point, in that you don't have to be a voter to get involved in voting.
But we hope people will vote if they can.
Right.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you again.
No, I was just saying, no, it's an opportunity, because some people think that the only part or the only way they can participate is to be a voter, but there are other areas in which just being a citizen, i.e., you don't have to be a voter, but if you're a citizen, you can observe a closing of the precinct.
I don't think you even have to be a citizen to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, no one's checking, I would hope, no one's checking people's papers at the polling place.
You're not ICE?
I'm not. No, I'm certainly not.
Yeah.
Too, and again, I'm using myself as an example. I know I've voted all my life. Okay. Now, but to get into the behind the scenes aspects of voting, and maybe there's some people out there who may be a little leery, but you just broke the ice with you don't even if you had a criminal record, you still could get involved. So how are we getting this message out? I mean, to bring more people, diversity into not only voting but these organizations?
I would love to hear your thinking about this, because the ways that I know to reach out to people, especially in the time of COVID, are mostly online, through social media, through podcasts, through articles, things like that are online. And I know that kind of work doesn't reach everybody. And one of the things that we've said at Scrutineers is we have organizations that are members of Scrutineers, and this was kind of before COVID that we said, if you've got in-person meetings of your organizations and you want to take our training videos and show them at your meetings, that's totally fine. But nobody's having in-person meetings now. So what do you think are the best ways to reach out beyond the people that you can reach online, to reach out to people who don't have internet access, for example?
Well, we're kind of limited, but there's still ways for us to reach people. Maybe not the number that we would like to, because of the distancing. But I know communities that we're in, we're more of a touchy-feely person. The trust factor, people who look like me, I'm more apt to listen to them and engage in them and to learn more about this process. So it's going to take, instead of maybe 50 people, it'll be 15. But we have to have those in-group meetings at 15 if that's the case, and people who look like them. Now, I know, Emily, you have a staunch record of working in the social atmosphere, civil rights. So you know what it takes. I'm sure you've run against people in your own organization that might not feel the way you feel. How do you get them to, if I will, to let down the walls, to embrace?
So I'm not sure if I know what you're asking.
Okay.
So are you asking me, how do I get white people? Are you asking me, how do I get white people to stop being afraid of being accused of being racist?
Golly,
is that what you're saying?
Emily. You're absolutely, yes, I am.
Okay. All right. You just said it so eloquently, then I was like, is that what's underneath there? Okay. So I'm going to kind of take a running start at this question, because I want to say some stuff that I think sort of comes before it. When I talk about election protection, one of the ways I think about it is that it's a combination of voting rights work and election security work. And to go into that a little more deeply, voting rights work in the couple 100-year tradition of the voting rights movement has been largely a Black-led movement that focuses on making sure everybody who has the right to vote gets to vote, and also expanding the right to vote, like the struggle that you're having in Florida in recent years about returning citizens, people who have been in prison and come back getting the right to vote again. And that's been back and forth on your ballots and in the courts in Florida. So expanding the right to vote. And then so that that work involves helping people register lately, making sure people don't get knocked off the voter rolls, the list of people who can vote, which I'm sure Greg Palast is going to talk about tomorrow night, because he's one of the people, if not the person, that's done the most for bringing that issue to light since the year 2000. And so it's focused on what happens up until the moment that people cast their vote, making sure they get to do that. Absolutely crucial, essential work. And then we have the election security part that, for the most part, starts with what happens the next moment after people cast their vote. What happens to those votes after they're counted, and making sure that the election results really reflect the preferences of the people who voted, the majority of the people who voted. Both of those, and that the people doing election security work have been largely, not entirely, white people. And those two movements really, really need each other, because it doesn't matter if we get everybody to vote if the votes aren't counted right. And it doesn't matter if we count the votes right if the people don't get to vote. So both things are really, really needed. And there's also really different strengths in those two movements, and we need each other in that way too. So all of that is really important. And I think my work has been more on the election security side of that. And what I think there's been, like, one of the failings of the election security movement has been a failure to identify that even when we're working on the election security part of the whole election protection picture, it is about racial justice. Because when we talk about the elections being manipulated to not count people's votes, whose votes aren't being counted? It's people of color. It's especially Black people. It's Latinx people. And to some extent, it's college students. But for the most part, it's people of color. And I think there's been really a failure to even recognize that among some of the people working on election security. And that's something I really want to see change. So in Scrutineers, one of the things is I talk about that stuff, and we talk about that, but I bring it up, like I'm often the person bringing up issues around race. And we actually we have a consultant that we brought in, Michelle Antoinette Nelson, who's our diversity, equity, and belonging consultant, because I wanted to really make sure that we were making a welcoming and safe and respectful place for everyone who joins. And she led a training that was called Repurposing Privilege. And what that was about was getting people to look at the areas that each of us carry privilege. And for some of us, it's race privilege. For some, it's class privilege, education, language, being able-bodied, having internet access. There's so many privileges that are involved in being in a place where you could be a member of an organization like Scrutineers or be able to vote, or be able to be an activist. And yes, we want a world where everybody has plenty of privilege across all of those areas and more. That's not the world that we have now. And so in the meantime, how can each of us use the ways that we have privilege to amplify the voices and the power of people who have less? So that's a way that I've invited people to think about it in Scrutineers, and I'm kind of admittedly trying to get around some of the defensiveness that comes up in some kinds of diversity trainings that happen, that people are just like, I see a lot of white people kind of having their defenses up a lot around that stuff, and I just don't think that's necessary. Nobody's saying if you haven't unlearned all the racist things that you were taught, which everybody in the United States was taught regardless of their race, that it means that you're a bad person. Just get over yourself and do your work, and be be present and welcoming to everybody. So that's my approach. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. You know, and then you went away for another question when you mentioned the young folk. If people can't be involved in organizations, they don't see enough of themselves, and they don't want to. And I would dare to say that perhaps this is boiling over. And I don't want to ever discourage anybody to not to vote. I don't want to do that. But perhaps not seeing them in the mechanism that causes or further vote. If we're not there, then it's kind of hard to want to be a part of it. You understand what I'm trying to say? If I can see it, I can be it. You know, that sort of thing. So, and that's all. But you did answer my question, and I want the listeners and the viewers to really get involved with this. It's not something that will hurt us. It could only help us. So,
yeah. No. And also to add to that, I think one of the things that we have to address along with this election protection is the ongoing the technical disparity, or should I say technology disparity, within many of these same communities. I saw Ellen Brodsky make a comment about when she ran for the NAACP, ran for the supervisor of elections. And I think one of the things that you have, especially within the urban communities, is this hold to a tradition. And so we've held on to the tradition of this push to vote, which is still very prevalent and very needed. But now that you're talking about this new technology, and we do have to address some of the fears, or should I say the elephant in the room. There is a fear among minorities when it comes to technology and their information. Probably more so than white America. But again, most Blacks have that fear of technology. And we've seen it from trying to ditch the digital divide to trying to deal with digital redlining. And so all of this begins to play a part. And now voting has now come into that same sphere. And trying to get people to understand that, because the first thing they're going to say is, "Ooh, that's too technical." And that becomes another barrier that we have to face. And so I think, Bobby, to your point about if I see it, I can believe it. One of the things that I hope that the audience can get out of what we're doing here in 2 Minute Warning is that everyone, as Emily said, they came from different backgrounds and found a way to get involved in that. And really, they were led by their passion and found a way to apply their skills to, fulfill that passion. So I think that's one of the areas that we all have to begin to address. Bobby, your question, how do we pull people in? It's hard because we like talking to the people who talk like us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you just said something. You said that, if I see it, I'll believe it. I think that's a really healthy attitude when it comes to elections, because a big part of what the problem is with the way our votes are counted now is that we can't see it,
mm-hmm.
right? Because it happens inside a computer. And so we shouldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. So I think if I see it, I believe it. I vote for that. I vote for that as a way that we talk about our elections and think about them. And I don't want in any way to be encouraging anybody to stop doing their voter registration work and their get out the vote work and their support for the candidates that they believe in. What I would love to see is when that work ends on election night is when the same people who are doing that work join in with some of the election security activities in monitoring the elections, doing things like photographing poll tapes. And there's some other things that happen after the election that can really make a difference in making sure the votes are counted accurately. And so the voting rights work is done at that point, or what we've traditionally thought of as the voting rights work is done for that election at that point, and people are already engaged and paying attention, and it's a great time to start doing some of the other activities. Unfortunately, it means getting trained for them a little bit first. So,
you know, and Emily, you said, and Perry, we talked about this. We got during the elections, you got people out at the polls, at the precincts, standing out with signs and doing all this. Nobody's taking a clicker to count the people who go in to vote. Nobody's doing anything after that fact. You said something, Emily, and here is where maybe our organizations, the Divine Nine, the NAACP, the Urban League, the other organizations, the Masons and everybody else. Here's where we can actually get involved with this. We can become a part of those organizations that make sure that this election protection process is what it's supposed to be. So I'm saying to those who are out there listening, if you are involved in any organization, if you're a part of the Divine Nine, then doggone it, you need to get involved with some form of election protection to make sure that this is happening. So that's my spiel for you Divine Nine and all the rest of us out there. So
fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you're asking me, what do we do about that? People want to hear from people who look like them. And, and if you're talking about the Black community, I'm not going to be the right spokesperson, but somebody who's already interested enough to be willing to listen to somebody who doesn't look like them, I'm going to spend time with them, helping them know what they need to know so they can go back to their community and teach.
Great. Yeah. No, I think it's all hands on deck time. And if you're in the middle of a battle, those things that we sort of see in the greater society usually don't play a role when you're in battle, because everyone's purpose is self-survival at that point. And so I think having discussions like this are very important. But I do want to transition because you said something about scrutineers that is really important, because as I'm hearing people hearing the call go out for poll workers, the poll worker plays a very important role. And so can you tell us what scrutineers is doing in terms of training our poll workers? And I know people will go, well, I'm a poll worker and we get training at the county.
Right, they do. But I've been a poll worker before, and I can say that the training focused on how to check people in, what to do if people come and they're not registered, or they're in the wrong precinct, or their address doesn't match, or that kind of thing. Or what if people say, you've got me down for the wrong party and it's a primary. So like, that's the kind of stuff that poll workers get trained to do. But poll workers have a unique position of being inside the polling place all day, where they might see some things that happen that might be red flags that there is a problem with the election. Like, for example, I'm going to make something up, okay? I don't know of this particular thing happening, but this is a thing that could happen. We got told to tell the voters that we were all out of paper ballots, even though the machine is broken that they're used to voting on. But I happened to notice that there were stacks of paper ballots in the back room. There's stuff that poll workers can notice that nobody else would get a chance to see. So if you're a poll worker, how do you know when to take something like that seriously? How do you know what to do if you're in a situation where you find that, or you're in a situation where you're seeing voters getting turned away, because they're not on the voting rolls? They go to check in and they're told you're not on the list, but you can see that they actually were on the list. or that when there's Black voters who are checking in, that the person who's looking at the list isn't looking very carefully for their name, or isn't, so there, or that there are machines that haven't been turned on, or that the machine that's supposed to provide access for voters with disabilities hasn't been set up. So there's all kinds of voter protection activities that are supposed to happen in the process of running an election, and a poll worker can be in a position of noticing when those things aren't happening if they know what to look for. So we want to be providing some, and our intention is to provide some supplementary training to help poll workers know what are some kinds of things to look for, and what to do if they find them. And we're actually in conversation right now with an organization that has been recruiting poll workers about offering that training to the thousands of poll workers that they've recruited, as well as anyone else who's in scrutineers. And that training hasn't begun yet, but it will be beginning soon.
Okay. And so in terms of that, and I heard Bobby talking about the Divine Nine, is there an opportunity for, say, organizations who want to, let's say they have a group of people that are interested in becoming poll workers. And so, I'm not sure about that process. I've been talking to a few people who said they've applied and they haven't heard anything. That's another issue. But even in terms of preparation, is there a way that, say, maybe groups can sort of join together and maybe have their training, or how does that happen?
I'd be very, very open to that. So folks can contact me through our website, or we're also on Twitter at Scrutineers US. If organizations want to talk about that, and there's a few different options of how we could set up something like that. And then in terms of if people want to apply to be poll workers, the thing to do is to contact your county board of elections or elections office. There are some states where elections are run on the town basis, not through the county, but whatever is your local election office, to go to their website if you can, or call them on the phone and say you're interested in becoming a poll worker. There are places now that have more poll workers than they need, because there's been so much publicity about the need for poll workers. And there are other places that still need a lot of people.
What other positions, jobs, things need to be done outside of the poll workers in this process?
There are so many, and it's one of those things where whatever skills people have, they're likely to be able to use them. And everything from, take that video that I showed you. There was an artist that drew the pictures, and there was an artist that did the voiceover, and there was an editor who applied his art to editing it. So there's skills like that of video and social media, legal skills, organizing people, public speaking, graphic design, all those kinds of things where you don't even necessarily need that much information about elections. You can just use your skill to do your thing, with that being the content, and we could provide the content. But in terms of the activities for actually protecting elections, there are many different choices, and we actually have, we're in the process of launching some projects within Scrutineers where people can really learn about the different things that are available to do. So I'll talk about a couple of them. One is to advocate in your county for best practices. There's a lot known about how to do an election well and how to do it poorly. And the people who run elections have a tremendously hard job in a good year. And in case you hadn't noticed, this is not a good year. And they have more to do than they could possibly do perfectly. And they don't have enough funding. And so even the best intentioned election workers, and there are many of those, are not going to be able to do everything well. They may actually be accepting volunteers for things like the processing of absentee or vote by mail ballots. Those different words are used to be for the ballots that people vote at home and mail in or deliver. So one thing that you could do is contact your elections office and find out what they need help with. And that's a good way to begin a relationship with them, that then if they see that you really care and you're diligent and you go in there and you're helping with the grunt work, and then you might bring in some questions that in scrutineers we could help you know what to ask. So things like, for example, there have been issues in some places with the voting machines not being distributed fairly in communities, and specifically with more machines or machines that are in better condition being put into white neighborhoods, and kind of funky broken down machines and or not enough machines into communities of color. Well, there's a website online where you can go and see what the recommendations are for how to figure out how many voting machines are needed in a community based on the population, what percentage of people tend to vote by mail, and of course that's going to be a little bit very different this year, what the voter turnout is like, things like that, so that it actually should be an objective decision, not just the opinion of how the election official wants to distribute the equipment. So you can start asking questions about stuff like that. And we're going to be teaching people the kinds of questions to ask. So that would be one example of best practices. I know in Broward County, you had an issue in the 2018 election with bad ballot design that caused undervotes in the congressional race, right? Because the way that the actual paper ballots were, the graphic design of them, or the design of them, put a congressional race way down in the corner underneath some stuff that people didn't really have to look at, as I like a bunch of instructions or something, if I remember correctly. And there are best practices that you can look up, that you can actually, if you can get to see the ballots when they're in draft, the design of the ballots in draft form, maybe you can give feedback on, look, this document says that you're not supposed to put something down in the corner. You're not supposed to do it this way. There are best practices. So that's one whole area, is like actually getting in there in your local elections office and asking the right questions. Yeah. Then there's thing that we talked about, poll tape. So that's an important election protection activity as well. Another thing that we can do, and this has been a big issue in Florida, is the current voting systems that are being used to count the votes that are on paper ballots are scanners that create a digital image of every ballot that's fed into it. So when people vote on a paper ballot, it's not human beings that count those. They're fed into a scanner, which is a computer, and it takes a picture of the ballot, and then it actually counts the votes on that picture, or that image. And this provides a possibility that didn't exist before for the public to check the counts of the computers to see if they're right, by getting access to those images and also counting the votes. And there's a lawsuit that has been going on, and it's kind of, there's a preliminary decision, and it's going to be continued after this election, but because many counties in Florida were destroying those images, even though legally they're required to keep them in a federal election for 22 months. So getting access to the ballot images is a process that involves some preparation before the election, so that you can get ready to request them right away at the end of an election, and know what to do with them, how to count the votes on them. And there's also some other ways that you can look at the data that you can get when you get ballot images, to do things that how do I say this? So I'm trying to not get into the technical weeds of it, but so there are some things that take a lot less people and time than actually counting all the votes, that can shed some light on whether the counts are accurate. So those are the kinds of things that we teach people to do in scrutineers. There's also voter contact. encouraging people to vote through postcard campaigns and phone calling of voters. That's very, very effective in increasing voter turnout.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of ways people can be involved in it. Something really important is that many of those things can be done from home. So if people are concerned about COVID or have other reasons that they would want to do their volunteering from home, that's absolutely possible to do.
I got two questions. I know time is
Bobby.
yeah.
Before we do that, I do have one thing that I do want to ask.
Sure.
I see some people online who, some heads of organizations who are or intimately involved, and I do want them to at least put your organization and a contact in the comments so that we can broadcast them. I see Lulu Friesdat with Smart Elections, as well as Andrea Sleeper, who is with the local League of Women Voters. And so I know that these are organizations who are committed to this. I'm not sure who all is on here, but please put your name, your organization, and maybe a Twitter or Facebook where people can find you, so Ari can do that while we're talking, because I know
Great.
people want to know where
Good.
they can find them. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Bobby.
No, you're all right. That's cool. It was two things. I know this is a nonpartisan conversation. If you could, I'm gonna ask you two questions. If you could, what would you tell each party concerning voter protection? That's one, and the other one is as bleak as our voting system may seem. What could we offer for hope? I know last night Benny said the more we get out to vote, the greater our chances are to keep anybody from creating chaos in the election process. So those are my two questions to you.
Okay, let's take the second one first.
Okay.
So I am hearing a lot of people saying, obviously there are people who are working right now in the United States to keep people from voting. And I'm hearing a lot of people say the way that we have to respond to that is we have to get everybody to vote. We have to, really, really have massive turnout. And I absolutely agree with that. I don't agree with the part that it's the only thing to do. Obviously, we've talked about some other things people can do. And I want to go back to the 2008 election briefly and say that from colleagues who have inside information that I don't have, it is my clear understanding that there was a plan to rig the 2008 election and make sure Obama didn't win. And that rig was called off at the last moment because Obama was so far ahead in the polls that basically the 2008 election, I believe, based on trusting colleagues who have information about it, that was an example of people outvoting the manipulation of the election. So it is possible to do that. So, and that could go, in either direction for either party. But in that example, the information that I have is that the rigging was planned on behalf of the Republicans. That doesn't mean that it was Republicans who did it, but whoever it was doing it for their benefit. So absolutely, we need to get out and vote and use our voices as loudly as we can to say who we want to win the election, not only the presidential election, but every race on the ballot. We're seeing this year with the uprising in the streets, how important it is who the sheriff is, who the police chief is. Vote all the races on the ballot. So what I will say is I am hearing from the president accusations that the election will be stolen, that we can't trust mail-in voting. He has quite a bit of power, as you might have noticed. If that's really true, there are things he could do about it. And I don't see him doing those things. If he believes that that vote by mail ballots are in danger of being manipulated, he could be saying, let's provide the funding to have a lot of monitors there to make sure everything's counted accurately. Let's make sure that there are enough eyes on this to know that the election's not stolen. So what I would say to him is stop complaining that the election is going to be stolen and make sure it's not. And what I would say to the Democrats is they are falling into a trap by responding to those accusations from the Republican president by saying, oh, no, we have nothing to worry about. The election systems are safe. They're not. They're not safe. And what the Democrats need to be saying is we need to make sure that they're safe, not that they're automatically safe. Because then what will happen is, should the election be stolen from them, whether it's the presidential election or a senatorial election, any election, they're going to be hard pressed to say, look, there's evidence of theft, because they're basically saying it's not possible.
Thank you.
Great. We do have a question. Barbara. Okay. Ari's here. Okay, great. We can stay in my lane.
Can you be a poll worker in a place where you do not live? Is a question from Barbara Sheffels. I don't know the answer to that question. So what I would say is, the place that you want to be a poll worker, go to the elections website and look at the requirements for being a poll worker. They will probably be posted right on the website.
Okay. There any other questions? I saw Benny was here, so just saying hello to Benny, who joined in.
I see Susie Hart has a question. You see that? Is Eric still there?
I am here, but Susie Hart's question was, who benefits from the big bond issue down ballot?
I'm sorry, I think it depends on what the bond issue is. I don't know how to answer that question, Susie. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Susie, if you can clarify, we will bring your question back on screen.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that you're on this mission to bring in 10,000 members. What can we do? Again, you are a vital part to this. I heard you say something that I knew to be very true. You said most tech people are not very organized. I know I'm not a very organized person at all.
Or not very organized, but just they're not community organizers for the most part.
Right. So how can we? I'm telling people about it, but what can we do to help that? Because the more resources we bear to help scrutineers, the more scrutineers really helps us. And I know, speaking on behalf of Citizens Audit Broward, we have this past election, I think we had maybe 50 volunteers, but when you consider we have 577 precincts, 50 volunteers is like, as they say, giving a whale a Tic Tac. And that's not to say that we have that many locations, but yes, definitely getting the right volunteers and also some skilled volunteers. And I accept all volunteers, but in some of this, we do need some very skilled volunteers. And so I do encourage all of you to please point people to scrutineers that are, so that we can all be helped in this.
Mm-hmm. I see Linda Thigpen answer that question about poll workers. She said poll workers must be residents of the county in which they reside. Thank you, Ms. Thigpen.
Did we lose?
I don't know if Emily.
She'll be right back, gentlemen. She'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
So,
Well,
are there any other questions or? Well,
Mr. Henry, if you'd like, you can talk about this particular flyer.
Yeah. Dr. Barber, William Barber. Everybody, a lot of people know him for Moral Mondays. He also has a voter protection, if you will, event. And this particular event is happening coming up September the 14th. But there's another part of this. It's called MORE, mobilizing, organizing. I forgot what it stood for. But I know, man. I know I'm human. I'm liable to error. However, if you just follow that link, you'll find out everything that you need to know about it. And I do apologize for not having it right on the tip of my tongue.
all right.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize for that interruption. I'm back.
Oh, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Emily, what do you consider to be some of the real troublesome areas that we really need to focus on heading into these last 8 weeks? Things that we really need to bunker up so that we can defend better.
There's so many places we could go with that question. I mean, one of the things that I get asked often is, don't you want to focus on just a few states? And my answer to that is no, I really don't. I really want election officials to feel that they are being watched everywhere. And I'm concerned about how many organizations that are working on voting rights and election security are focused only on the swing states, because the presidential election, as we've said, is not the only election. It's not the only important election happening right now. You know, we've got legislatures, we've got Senate and House races, we've got all kinds of things on the ballot that really, really matter. And I'm concerned that if everybody's only focused on the presidential swing states, that all kinds of trouble, not good trouble, could happen in other places. So what actually needs to be done in terms of protecting elections is different in different places. And some of that depends on what kind of election equipment is being used. There's different things need to be done to protect elections with when different kinds of election equipment are being used. Some of the risks are different, and some of the methods of election protection are different. There's things, so obviously a huge area is vote by mail. So one thing that's really important is for communities to try to get secure drop boxes for ballots. We still will need to depend on the mail service to get the vote by mail ballots to the voters, which of course I'm concerned about. But if people can drop them in drop boxes instead of mailing them back, that's only, that cuts the amount of mail in half, and the problem of the mail service is somewhat decreased by that. So that's a really important thing for people to advocate for. And, it may not take, if you haven't ever tried to get your local government to do something, that might seem like a really overwhelming thing. But when we've got something like the procedures around elections, boards of election are not really used to the public caring very much about things, about sort of, the how sausage is made, part of elections. And because of that, sometimes only a few voices can make a difference. So, 10 people calling on one day saying, are we going to have secure ballot drop boxes in our community, might be enough to get them in a particular community. So I want to really encourage people to try and not to just assume that they can't make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I saw a comment on my Facebook. Someone was saying, well, maybe we should begin to do PSAs around some of these issues, which I think is great, especially for the West Side Gazette, since we have that platform. Those things would be great to put forth, especially through the NNPA as well, the Black Press, uh, who has a long history in all of these communities. I think if we began to develop uh, a consistent and the one thing I will say about the GOP, they are always on target with their messaging, and unfortunately, with Democrats, you get all sorts of messaging. But in this case, I think having that kind of approach may help. What do you think?
Were you asking Bobby or are you asking me?
You're asking
Both of you.
Well, I think in terms of growing the movement, the two ways that I see that we can grow fast enough to have that 10,000, hit that 10,000 people goal by the election are, number one, for people who are already involved in election protection work, whether it's through scrutineers or another organization or both, to tell people, to, you know, like one of the lessons that we are learning from the COVID-19 pandemic is how quickly things spread when they grow exponentially, right? So let's make something good grow exponentially, you know,
Right.
grow virally. Faster. Let's try to grow this faster than COVID-19 spreads. And if everybody who's watching this could share this video or invite people to tomorrow's video or share the other videos in this series on your social media, if you use social media, or call people and tell them about it. If each person could bring in one new person each week, we would grow very, very quickly. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is to bring in organizations that people are already connected to. Every single organization or group that's working to make the world better depends on elections. Even if they are not putting things on the ballot, they're not putting ballot questions or propositions, as they're called here in California, on the ballot, they depend on the courts being fair. They depend on the legislature actually representing the communities. They depend on, you know, if they're protesting in the street, they depend on the sheriff and the police chief representing the community's interests and actually protecting the population. They depend on all kinds of things that come from election results. And so I think that it's really important that we reach out to the other groups that we're part of and say, we need to be paying attention to the election this year, and also to the census, by the way. You know, let's get everybody to fill in their census forms and send them in. If they haven't, that's hugely important. But there are some of these election protection projects that an organization that isn't really an election protection organization could take on. You know, a PTA could take on, let's go photograph the poll tapes in our community, because it matters to us that our votes are counted, and it matters to us that our children learn that we care and that we need to pay attention to what happens in our communities. There's no reason that high school classes couldn't encourage students to do projects that are based on, you know, helping protect the elections while they're doing their schooling, whether it's from home or in the classroom. You know, there's all kinds of ways that groups of people that are already assembled for another purpose could take this on.
And for me, Perry, it was not only of convenience, because I was able to go to the precinct right around the corner from where I live, but it was also the interest, the fact that, yes, it's more than filling out that ballot to voting. And once I became once you educated me on the process, then I was willing to learn. So I think our role in this is number one. Well, first of all, in this day, is to think about the convenience. Okay, I mean, now be that as it is. I know during the struggle, convenience didn't play a part. We did it because we had to. So now, if we concentrate on trying to pair marriage people with areas that they are in naturally, you're already there. So why not take part of it? This is how you do it. So we educate with convenience of the need to have this done. And so that's my answer to that question, Perry.
Okay, great. Ari? We're not hearing you.
I think you're muted, Ari.
Thank you. We have a question from one of our Facebook viewers, Karen. She asks, if I live in California, a state that is not a swing state, or does it have a history of election corruption, can you explain how it helps the whole effort to scrutiny here?
Thank you for that question. So I'm trying to figure out which end of this question I want to start with. So one thing that I want to say is, I talked earlier about how it's possible to do some of this work from home. That also means that it's possible to do some of this work in states that you're not in. When I did that project in Ohio in 2004, I never went to Ohio. I did it all from my home in California. So there's all kinds of things that people can do. Like, let's just take, because we've talked about it in enough detail that I think people probably understand it, the example of taking photographs of poll tapes. Now, unless you've got a heck of a telephoto lens, or you're Sarah Palin standing on your porch taking pictures of poll tapes in Russia, you probably have to be in your community to take pictures of the poll tapes there. However, once we've got thank you for enjoying that. I enjoyed it too. However, once you've got those pictures, there's another step, right? You got to compare the numbers on those poll tapes to the count that is posted from the county. And that part can be done by somebody who's not in Florida. That part can be done by Karen in California. Right? So there's always pieces, there's always support work that people who are far away can do. So that said, California is not considered to be a swing state in the presidential election. There are important races in California. There are important measures on the ballot in California. And we actually do have history of questionable election results in California. And, I think it's something that happens often in scrutineers, is that people will come in and they'll say, I live in whatever state, we don't have problems with our elections here, what can I do? And the thing is that the kinds of problems that we're talking about that happen with elections are mostly not in the news. It's been very hard to get news coverage for suspicious elections. It's been very hard to prove that elections have been manipulated because we're not allowed to see the evidence. It's not because the evidence doesn't exist, but because the public isn't allowed to see it. The press doesn't cover it. So the farther you look into the history of elections in a particular area, the more likely you are to find that they're not as clean as you might think. So Karen is a member of Scrutineers, and we can talk about some of the history in California in there. I don't want to go into it now, but I do want to say one other thing that people can do wherever they are. When it comes to challenging an election because the results look suspicious, in some places, the only people who have the legal standing, the only people who have the right to challenge the election in court are candidates who are on the ballot. I personally think that's wrong, because elections don't belong to the candidates, they belong to the voters. But that's the way the law is written. So a really important thing to do is to go to candidates, either they could be candidates you support or don't, it doesn't matter, and make sure that they understand their role in the role that they may have in needing to challenge an election if the results are questionable. And a member of Scrutineers named April Smith has actually created a letter that people can take to candidates, and it explains some of the problems with elections. You will learn a ton from reading the letter and following the links in it. I'll give a link to it in just a moment. And you can approach candidates running for any office in your jurisdiction and say, we want you to be paying attention to election security because you may have an important role to play. So I'm going to type, let's see. I'm going to type into the comments. I guess I could, can I do that? I don't see a way. Let's see. It doesn't look like I can type into the comments. I only have private chat with the host. So
Emily, if you type it in the chat, I'll post it as a banner.
okay. Thank you, Ari.
No problem.
It's called the Candidate Caution Letter. Okay. And you could send that to them. You could mail that letter to them. You could email it to them. You could tweet it to them. However you want to reach out to candidates. You could show up at their campaign events and hand it to them. So all kinds of options for how to get that to candidates.
Okay. Ooh.
So I have a question for the two of you. Can we end with that?
Sure.
Sure.
What's the most shocking thing you've learned in doing these interviews this week?
Oh, okay, I'll start. Well, that they are professional hackers here in the United States and not Russia, messing with our elections. Then to know that, and Emily, I'm not blowing smoke. From the voter side, as it pertains to Black folk, to know that there is a white girl from California who has spent her time trying to bring diversity into an organization that benefits everybody, and that's the truth. When we talked off screen, and you shared some things, and that was very interesting, and it gives me hope, that there. And I'm serious. I'm not just blowing
Thank
smoke.
you.
I don't play with that. So those are the two things that have stood out the most. Well, Jennifer, on the other, to include Jennifer, that's another pistol. so it's some ammunition out there for us to use, but we have to we have to be engaged with that, with the resources. So yeah, those are the things that interest me and shock me. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. When I was saying at the beginning about how my friend heard this interview on the radio back in 2004 and called me and said, there's this guy who's doing a project and maybe you could help him. And I thought, I'll reach out to him, but I'll never hear back because, he's some big muckety muck. I don't want anybody to think that about me, or about Scrutineers. If there's people watching this who want to get involved and they think, well, I have a group she could speak to, or Scrutineers could send a speaker to, but why would they want to hear from me? We want to hear from you. This is all about growing this movement, getting more people involved. So if you're a member, if you've got a church social justice committee or a synagogue social justice committee, or you have, your whatever it is, your Rotary Club wants to get involved, your local chapter of the NAACP wants to get involved, whatever it is, I would love to hear from you. And you can contact us. There's an email link on the scrutineers.org website, or you can reach us through Twitter. Thank you, Ari, for putting those links up on the screen. So what about you, Perry? What's the most shocking thing this week?
The most shocking, I guess I would say, that even with all that is currently taking place, how I still see the complacency of our people around this subject. And I'm not one to look at who doesn't come along. I'm more encouraged by who comes along. But I guess the shocking thing is for all of the talk about how there is a need for change, that it still seems as though we're still approaching this in the same fashion that we did in 2016. I know that is not true across the board. But the one thing that in looking at who didn't, or how there was not a rush to come here, because Bobby and I, we're some great promoters. If we don't do this, we might be able to get into into another game. But what has surprised me most is really just the feedback from the people who did come, and it is encouraging. And so it's just like you said. I mean, and one of the things that I wanted to do, that I hope would come through this, is the value of understanding networking. And that your network is not just a one-to-one, it is an exponential process if you just develop it right. I mean, it's not just one tell one. No, it's one tells two, tells four, tells, and that's where we have to get to in terms of this. I think we've done a good job. Emily talked about this before, about the civil rights movement and the voting rights and how we look at that now, and they've had pretty much a 50-year head start on this election integrity issue. And that just shows you that we're still, several years back in this. And in a technology standpoint, because that's where I come from. I come from a technology background. Several years can break a company in terms of advancement. And so one of the things that I've seen in the citizens audit is really just the need for the volunteers just to transcribe. We talk about the people taking the pictures. We talk about people like me who crunch the numbers and put it all in databases. The one vital piece that we need is people who can just look at pictures and transcribe that into spreadsheets. And that's a vital link. It doesn't sound like much, but it's vital. And we've been playing double duty with this, and it has slowed down our process, because when you look at elections, we have 30 days before certification. And if we can't compile data, begin to look at this and begin to raise those questions, then we'll end up being just like we were in 2016, that by the time February came around, you had people pointing to all of the holes, but by the end, it's too late. So we've got to shorten this window, and that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well.
So with that said, Emily, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been really fun. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has only gotten better with each night, and for that I'm totally grateful. Thank you, Bobby.
Yeah.
And most of all, thank Ari. I don't want to let this go by without saying thank you to Ari. More than just being a producer for the show and asking the questions, she has been the glue that is together. So I do want to publicly say thank you to Ari.
Yep. If I could, I didn't at the beginning, but I want to thank Dr. Chavis for being a part of the program last night. I think that anytime we can bring history into our programs and that history is still alive, then we should do it. So I want to give a personal thank you to Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr., President and CEO of the NNPA, and congratulations on his new segment with PBS, the Chavis Chronicles. And Emily, I want to say, let's see, you said the levy. Yeah, levy. Am I saying it correctly?
You did. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And I really want to thank you. I enjoyed this, and you will be hearing from us. Now, I have the propensity to kind of turn screws on individuals. So some of them may say, well, Bobby, what should I do? I think you should get in contact with the scrutineers, and let's see if we can make something happen right
Great.
here. Then the thick pen, you hear me? So I think we need to do that. So I'm gonna call some names out. Miss Sabrina Beeson, I hope you hear us. Miss Ida
Well, I'm
Harris,
staying
I
on
hope
your
you
good
hear us.
side.
So I'm just calling names out because I think these folk want to do something. They are about organizing. So I thank you.
We have a new member orientation coming up on Saturday, just a day after tomorrow. So it's a really good time to join, and I'll be there kind of helping people understand in more detail what we're trying to do, and answer questions about where to find things on the website and take people's questions. So that's coming right up.
Okay.
Thank you again so very much, and thanks for everybody for watching.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. And again, tomorrow night, we will close out this 4-night episode with Greg Palast, award-winning journalist who has been really involved in elections, especially here in Florida, dating back to the 2000 election. And so Greg has a new book out that came out in July that was called How Trump Stole 2020. And so if you've ever met Greg or ever seen Greg, you know he is a character, but he is going to give us some great information. And so I invite all of you to please come back tomorrow and join us. And please go to scrutineers.org, sign up, and get your organizations, get your community involved in this election. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.